This video is not recommended for viewing by persons under the age of 16. Each of us at least once in his life watched or started to watch a horror movie. There are those for whom this genre has become a favorite and who watch scary films on a regular basis. At the same time, few people know that many horror films were filmed based on real stories. Top F collected 5 of such stories and will tell you about them in this video. Get your popcorn ready, we start. The Amityville Horror. The movie hit became one of the world's top box office hits in 2005, earning over $100 million. The plot revolves around the misadventures of the Lutz family, who move into a new house and find themselves in the thrall of the ghosts inhabiting the cursed dwelling. But the most interesting thing is that behind all this mystical feeling there is no paranormal background at all. But there is a crime drama, by the way, not without mysteries and oddities. Real story. We are talking about the murder of the DeFeo family in the town of Amityville in one of the districts of the state of New York. On November 13, 1974, the eldest offspring of the family, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo, reported that, upon returning home from work, he found all the household members dead. Father, mother, 2 sisters, and 2 DeFeo brothers were indeed found shot to death in their beds. The police immediately decided that this was the work of the Italian mafia, with which the head of the family had long-standing ties. But 2 days later, the investigator, when examining Ronald's room, discovered a box from a rifle, which was the murder weapon. Under pressure from the police, the young man began to get confused in his testimony, gave 2 failed versions, but soon nevertheless admitted his guilt, saying that he drowned the rifle, shells, and blood-stained clothes in the sewer. Later, the investigation found out that life in the DeFeo house was not sugar. The father of many children kept beating his wife, tyrannizing the children. The boy grew up aggressive, with a broken psyche, and at the same time, wealthy parents did not refuse him cash and expensive gifts. At the age of 17, Ronald left school and began to trade in petty theft and robbery, got hooked on drugs and alcohol. Sometime before the murder, the guy completely robbed his father for a large amount, simulating a robbery along with his friends. The trial of Ronald DeFeo took place almost a year later, in October 1975. The lawyer built his defense on the version of the insanity of his client. Allegedly, the young man heard voices in his head for 28 days ordering him to kill his relatives. However, experts recognized DeFeo as sane, and the judge determined for him 150 years in prison, 6 terms of 25 years. However, despite the closure of the case, the investigation could not but admit that in this terrible story there were still a number of oddities that they could not explain. Why didn't other family members wake up and run when the killer started shooting at the first victims? Why did none of the neighbors hear a good dozen shots, although the rifle was without a silencer? How could a guy, even being armed, single-handedly deal with 2 adults and 4 teenagers? These and other questions remain unanswered. Well, the ill-fated house of the DeFeo family was soon bought by the Lutz family, who moved out almost a month later, leaving even their own things in a hurry. The couple said that all this time in the home there were paranormal phenomena. The young couple spent just 28 days in their new dream home before running away. Husband George claimed that he woke up around 3:15 a.m. every day. At the same time, they felt cold around the house and even claimed to levitate above their beds. When the priest came to bless the house, a demonic voice told him to get out. They refused to explain what was the last straw that forced them to leave the house, but they grabbed only a few things and never returned there. And although the confessions of the Lutz couple were called fictional, A few years later, Jay Anson's mystical novel The Amityville Horror came out, which Hollywood screenwriters took as the basis for future movie hits. To date, there are about 10 films and 1 series about the Amityville tragedy. And the cursed house still stands in its place. In 2010, it changed owners for the 3rd time. By the way, none of the subsequent owners complained about the presence of otherworldly forces in the house. Borderland. 3 American students went on vacation to Mexico in search of entertainment. But instead, they fell into the clutches of local occultists who kill strangers as sacrifices. The picture is replete with frighteningly realistic bloody shots. But the most shocking thing is that this story actually took place in Mexico in the late 80s. The picture is included in the top horror films based on real events. Real story. The plot was based on the loud disappearance of American medical student Mark Kilroy. In March 1989, the guy and the company of 3 friends went on a pleasure trip to Mexico. The guys arrived in the border town of Matamoros, where they got pretty drunk and lost sight of each other. Having sobered up, the guys discovered the loss of Kilroy. Alas, by this time he was already dead. He was brutally murdered by the ministers of the Palo Mayombe cult, headed by Adolfo Constanzo. In search of this drug dealer, Satanist, and murderer, the police of not only Mexico, but also the United States, were knocked off their feet. Constanzo was born in America, learned and became addicted, by the way, not without the help of his mother, to dark occult practices. He decided to apply his knowledge in black magic in Mexico and, having gathered a handful of followers, he moved to Mexico City. Here, his dark deeds really went uphill. Fortune-telling, the performance of satanic rituals with sacrifice was widespread here and in the circles of the richest people. Soon, Adolfo himself became one of them, buying out a share in the family business of the drug lords Hernandez. It was then that the killer began to live happily ever after. Settling on the Santa Elena ranch near the border Matamoros, Constanzo controlled the flow of drugs and rode, as they say, money with a shovel. But, as a priest of the Palo Mayombe, he could not be content with luxury alone. The dark ego of the Satanist demanded blood, and his idol demanded new victims. And Adolfo's henchmen began to hunt for people. They caught both homeless people and finished drug addicts, as well as foreign tourists who sailed to Matamoros for cheap entertainment. The bodies of the unfortunate were dismembered and filled with pieces of flesh in a special occult cauldron in Gangu, over which the supreme minister of the cult conjured. The remains of the sectarians were buried here, on the ranch. The body of Mark Kilroy, or rather what was left of him, was discovered only in April. Then the police tracked down one of the drug couriers and raided Santa Elena with a search. The remains of another 15 people were also found. On the trail of the leader, law enforcement officers came out only in May. Realizing that the house in which he was hiding was surrounded by policemen, Constanzo ordered his men to shoot him. The founder of the sect was only 26 years old at the time of his death. And Mark Kilroy's parents still keep the memory of their son. They founded a foundation that helps fight drug trafficking and also supports medical students. Child's Play. Child's Play is the first film in the horror legend Chucky doll franchise. The film opens with the police in pursuit of fugitive serial killer Charles Lee Ray. The criminal takes several bullets. As he dies, he performs a Haitian voodoo spell to transfer his soul into a popular baby doll. This same doll goes to 6-year-old Andy. A series of mysterious and brutal murders take place, and a boy is considered the prime suspect. His mother tries to prove the murderous doll's intentions before it continues his crime spree. Real story. The real doll that Chucky is based on is even creepier. The Robert doll is a straw-clothed toy dressed in a sailor suit with black buttons and a sinister grin. And it is one of the most famous cursed dolls in American history. The doll originally belonged to Robert Gene Otto, who named the toy after himself when he received it as a gift as a child. It is still unknown who gave him the doll, but the most common version is that it was a gift from one of the servants of the Otto family, who treated the woman cruelly. It is assumed that she knew the art of voodoo. The boy loved Robert and took him everywhere. He even started whispering to his doll and telling secrets. His parents became suspicious only when they heard a deep voice answering the boy in an answer that soon escalated into a violent argument. However, as soon as the parents entered his bedroom, hearing the noise, they saw the boy alone with the doll, and he cowered in horror. Other oddities were happening at this time. The rest of Jen's toys were torn apart, the furniture was constantly overturned, and the parents noticed a small figure running around the house. The boy said to all the comments that the Robert doll did all this. Even when Gene grew up, got married and started his career, he took Robert with him. The man kept the doll in the window of his house, and numerous people passing by reported that they noticed how Robert's frightening faces appeared and immediately disappeared. The owner, of course, did not listen to them and even to his wife, who hated the doll. Gene died in 1974. Myrtle Ryder bought the house after his death and donated Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida, where he has been on display since 1994. Now the doll is just sitting behind the window. However, hundreds of people visit it every week. Before photographing an exhibit, they must ask permission from the exhibit. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The main villain of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre horror film series is a psychotic maniac named Leatherface who hunts for a group of young people. Despite the enormity of the character, his image, as it turned out, was written off from a person who once lived. Therefore, the film series replenishes the list of horrors based on real events. Real story. Edward Theodore Gein was born in 1906 in Wisconsin. The boy was not lucky with his family from the very beginning. Mother, a devout Lutheran, kept a small grocery store, which fed all the household members. An alcoholic father was of no use, and his mother showed him her contempt in every possible way. Her sons, the eldest Henry and the youngest Ed, were raised by Mrs. Augusta Gein in an excessively strict manner inspired by religious beliefs. The woman protected the boys from communicating with their peers, and there was no talk of friendship with girls at all. According to Augusta, all women are completely dissolute creatures, and only sin and lust flourish around. However, the neighborhood kids did not want to play with Edward. Moreover, he was ridiculed in every possible way for a physical defect. The boy had a skin growth on his left eyelid. Even then, classmates called him strange. Ed could suddenly laugh in class for no reason. From 1940 to 1945, Edward lost all his loved ones one by one. First, his father died of pneumonia, and a year later, under strange circumstances, Henry died. The brothers were burning grass, and suddenly a fire broke out, extinguishing which the firemen discovered the body of the elder Jen. Biographers of the maniac are still inclined to the version that it was Ed who killed his brother. But then no charges were brought against the young man. All these events knocked down Augusta, and in 1945 she died, not recovering from her second stroke. Ed, who idolized his mother, was very homesick. But he soon found consolation in reading, and he gravitated mainly to books on anatomy, and also adored studying sources about Nazi atrocities during the war years and reveled in reading obituaries in local newspapers. He moonlighted by looking after at home for the neighbors' children. However, for the guys he was harmless, the dead people attracted the maniac much more. Increasingly, Edward spent time in the cemetery and then grew bolder and began to dig up graves, stealing corpses, and it was female. Later he would say that he was under the influence of the image of his mother. At home, he dismembered bodies. But soon the psychopath also wanted fresh blood. In 1954, he killed the mistress of a local tavern and took her body. In 1957, the owner of the hardware store disappeared. Her son found a pool of blood in the house and a dropped receipt in the name of Edward Ginn. Arriving at the maniac's house, the police discovered a shocking picture. Ginn himself confessed to the murder of 2 women, after which he was declared insane and was placed in a hospital for the mentally ill criminals. The necrophilic psychopath lived to a ripe old age and died in July 1984 from cancer. The Exorcist. The Exorcist is one of the most memorable horror films of all time. It tells the story of a 12-year-old girl named Reagan who begins acting strangely after making contact with an entity through an Ouija board. She begins to swear profusely, make strange noises, and becomes cruel to those around her. During this time, her mother Chris becomes increasingly concerned about her daughter's changes. Various medical examinations show no results. A local priest and psychiatrist find out about Reagan and begin to suspect that she has been possessed by the devil. The man receives permission for an exorcism and, along with another expert, tries to free the girl from the evil within her. Real story. The film is based on the 1971 novel of the same name, which also draws inspiration from a real-life case of exorcism in the 1940s. It was believed that the 14-year-old boy, known under the pseudonym Roland Doe, was possessed by the devil. Shortly before this, Doe's beloved aunt, a spiritualist with whom the boy was very close, died. She taught him how to use the Ouija board. Shortly after the death of his aunt, the boy began to hear inexplicable sounds such as scratching and dripping water, also began to have a sensation that his bed was shaking and objects were rising on their own. His family visited several doctors and priests until they found one who agreed to an exorcism. But things did not go as the priest had hoped. Like the girl in the film, Doe was out of his mind throughout the process and behaved violently. At some point, he freed one hand, pulled the spring out of the mattress, and cut the priest's hand with it. The exorcism was stopped and the family was forced to find another expert. 3 exorcist priests immediately came to their aid. Reports claimed that the boy carved curses on his body and even broke the nose of one of the priests during their seances. But the religious leaders did not give up, and one night it was all over. The priests promised the demon that St. Michael would fight him for the boy's soul. After that, Dow came out of his trance, simply said he left and continued to live a completely normal life without demons. That's all for today. Mr. Top F was with you. Thanks for watching to the end. Subscribe to the channel and like this video if you haven't done it yet. Also, turn on notifications on our channel to catch all new videos. Bye.